Nobody save the millionaire's 8-year-old son who fell into a hole at a playground. Only the poor janitor saved him. Subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. The morning sun cast long shadows across the pristine lawns of Maple Grove Estate, one of Connecticut's most exclusive residential communities. Nestled in the rolling hills of Fairfield County, the estate housed some of America's wealthiest families behind its wrought iron gates and manicured hedges. The air carried the scent of fresh-cut grass and blooming dogwood trees, a picture-perfect spring day that would soon shatter into chaos. Helen Martinez wiped the sweat from her weathered brow as she pushed her cleaning cart along the cobblestone path toward the children's playground. At 52, she had worked as a custodial staff member at Maple Grove for over a decade, her calloused hands testament to countless hours of maintaining the pristine appearance that wealthy residents expected. Her graying hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her navy blue uniform bore the small embroidered logo of the estate's management company. Despite the early hour, she moved with purpose, knowing that the playground would soon fill with children and their caregivers. Helen had seen it all during her years at Maple Grove: the silent tears of lonely housewives, the heated phone conversations of stressed executives, the elaborate birthday parties that cost more than most people's annual salaries. She had learned to move through their world like a ghost, invisible yet essential, cleaning up after lives she could never afford to live herself. The playground sprawled across nearly an acre of the estate's grounds, featuring state-of-the-art equipment imported from Denmark. Colorful climbing structures rose like modern sculptures against the backdrop of century-old oak trees. Safety-compliant rubber mulch covered the ground in vibrant blues and greens, designed to cushion any falls. Everything about the space screamed money and meticulous planning, or so it appeared. "Mrs. Patterson, Tommy's being mean to me again." The high-pitched voice of 7-year-old Madison Thornfield cut through the morning air as Helen approached the play area. The little girl's golden curls bounced as she ran toward her nanny, her designer dress somehow still pristine despite an hour of play. "Madison, darling, use your indoor voice," replied Mrs. Patterson, a stern British woman in her 60s who had been imported specifically to care for the Thornfield children. Her accent carried the authority of someone who had managed privileged children for decades. And Tommy, young man, apologized to Miss Madison this instant. Tommy Blackwell, 8 years old with unruly brown hair and grass stains on his polo shirt, rolled his eyes dramatically. "Sorry, Madison," he muttered, not sounding sorry at all. His own caregiver, a young woman named Sarah, was busy scrolling through her phone while half-heartedly supervising from a nearby bench. Helen began her routine maintenance of the playground's perimeter, emptying trash bins and wiping down benches. She had memorized the schedules of the estate's children. Tommy was always the first to arrive and the last to leave, his boundless energy a stark contrast to his father's demanding work schedule. William Blackwell III, the boy's father, was rarely seen at the estate during daylight hours, his billion-dollar investment firm keeping him occupied from dawn to well past midnight. "Tommy, stay where I can see you," Sarah called out, not looking up from her screen. The boy was already scaling the tallest climbing structure, his sneakers finding purchase on the geometric holds with practiced ease. Helen shook her head quietly. In her decade at Maple Grove, she had watched children grow up with every material advantage but precious little genuine attention from the adults paid to care for them. These kids had nannies, tutors, and coaches, but what they really craved was someone to truly see them, to listen to their stories, to celebrate their small victories. The morning progressed with typical playground drama: disputes over swing turns, scraped knees that required bandages and comfort, and the endless negotiations that arose when privileged children interacted. Helen continued her work, invisible to most, but always watching, always ready to help when needed. Around 10:30, as the spring sun climbed higher and warmed the Connecticut air, Tommy made his way to a section of the playground that featured a series of interconnected tunnels and slides. The equipment here was newer, installed just 2 years prior after the estate's board approved a $500,000 playground expansion. "I'm going to be the tunnel king," Tommy announced loudly, disappearing into one of the larger tube slides. His voice echoed from within the enclosed structure, a hollow sound that made Helen pause in her work. Mrs. Patterson looked up from her conversation with another nanny. Tommy, don't climb inside the equipment in ways it's not designed for. But Tommy, like most 8-year-olds, was already pushing boundaries. He had discovered that if he crawled backwards up one particular slide, he could access a maintenance panel that had been left slightly ajar. The gap wasn't visible from the outside, hidden by the slide's curved design, but to a curious child, it represented an irresistible mystery. Helen heard the sound first, a low groaning, like old wood settling, but different. Wrong. She stopped wiping down a picnic table and turned toward the playground equipment, her experienced ears picking up something the others missed. "Did you hear that?" she called to Mrs. Patterson. "Hear what, dear?" The British nanny replied, barely glancing over. The sound came again, louder this time. A rumbling, grinding noise that seemed to emanate from beneath the playground itself. Helen's eyes widened as she saw something that made her heart skip, a hairline crack appearing in the safety surface near the base of Tommy's favorite slide. "Tommy!" she yelled, dropping her cleaning supplies and running toward the equipment. "Tommy, get out of there right now." Her urgency finally caught the attention of the other adults. Mrs. Patterson looked up from her phone. Sarah stopped her conversation mid-sentence, and the 3 other nannies present turned to see what had caused Helen's outburst. That's when the ground gave way. The crack widened with a sound like breaking thunder, and a section of the playground surface collapsed inward, revealing a gaping hole approximately 4 feet across. The safety mulch tumbled into the darkness below like colorful snow, and somewhere in that chaos, Tommy's terrified scream echoed from the depths. "Oh my God!" Sarah shrieked, jumping to her feet but remaining frozen at the bench. Tommy, can you hear me?" The other children began crying, confused and frightened by the sudden commotion. Mrs. Patterson herded them away from the collapsed area, while shouting instructions no one seemed to follow. The security guard stationed near the playground's entrance spoke rapidly into his radio, calling for emergency services, but made no move toward the hole. "Someone help him!" Sarah continued screaming, tears streaming down her face. "Someone has to help him." But in those crucial first moments, as Tommy's cries for help drifted up from the underground void, every adult present seemed paralyzed by shock, liability concerns, or simple fear. The wealthy world of Maple Grove Estate, with all its resources and supposed sophistication, had produced a group of people who knew how to manage privileged children in controlled circumstances, but had no idea how to respond to a real crisis. Helen looked around at the frozen faces, the nannies clutching their phones, the security guard waiting for backup, the grounds crew member who had arrived, but stood helplessly at the edge of the hole. In that moment, she realized with crystal clarity that if Tommy was going to be saved, she would have to be the one to do it. Without hesitation, without considering the liability issues or the potential dangers, Helen Martinez dropped to her knees at the edge of the collapsed ground and called down into the darkness. Tommy, honey, can you hear me? It's Helen, the cleaning lady. I'm going to get you out of there, okay?" A weak voice drifted up from below. "Helen? I'm scared. My leg hurts really bad." "I know, sweetheart. I'm coming down to get you. Just stay calm." The hole was narrow, barely wide enough for an adult to fit through, and Helen could see water at the bottom, about 12 feet down. The underground leak that had caused the collapse was still active, slowly filling the space where Tommy had fallen. Tom was running out. "Ma'am, you can't go down there." The security guard finally spoke up. "It's too dangerous. The fire department will be here soon." Helen looked at him with steely determination. That boy doesn't have time to wait for the fire department. As she lowered herself into the hole, her feet finding purchase on the exposed pipes and broken concrete, Helen could hear the other adults above, their voices a mixture of concern and legal worry. But all that mattered was the frightened child waiting in the darkness below, and the knowledge that sometimes, when the ground gives way beneath us, it's not the wealthy or the powerful who step up. It's those with the biggest hearts and the strongest hands. "Hold on, Tommy," she called down as she descended. "I'm almost there." The underground cavity was a nightmare of twisted metal, broken concrete, and rising water. As Helen's feet touched the muddy bottom, the cold liquid immediately soaked through her work shoes, chilling her to the bone. The space was cramped, perhaps 8 feet wide and 12 feet long, created by the catastrophic failure of an old storm drain that had been slowly deteriorating for months beneath the playground's expensive facade. "Tommy, where are you, honey?" Helen's voice echoed off the concrete walls as her eyes adjusted to the dim light filtering down from above. "Over here," came a weak reply from the far corner. "I can't move my leg." Helen carefully made her way through the debris-strewn water, her hands feeling along the rough walls for support. The smell down here was overwhelming, a mixture of stagnant water, rust, and something else that made her stomach turn. The underground leak was more serious than anyone had realized, and the water level was steadily rising. She found Tommy huddled against a concrete support beam, his face streaked with tears and dirt. His left leg was trapped beneath a chunk of broken asphalt that had fallen when the surface collapsed. The 8-year-old's usual bravado had completely disappeared, replaced by the terrified vulnerability of a child who suddenly understood that the world wasn't as safe as he'd believed. "Hey there, brave boy," Helen said softly, crouching down beside him. "Let me take a look at this." "It hurts so bad," Tommy whimpered, "and the water keeps getting higher. Are we going to drown down here?" Helen examined the situation with the practical eye of someone who had spent decades solving problems with limited resources. The concrete chunk wasn't massive, maybe 40 pounds, but it was positioned in such a way that simply lifting it could cause more damage to Tommy's leg. She needed to be smart about this. "Listen to me, Tommy," she said, her voice calm and reassuring despite the urgency of their situation. "I'm going to get this off your leg, but I need you to be very still when I do it, okay? Can you do that for me?" Above them, she could hear the chaos continuing. Sarah's hysterical sobbing, Mrs. Patterson's clipped British accent giving orders that no one seemed to follow, and the security guards' increasingly frantic radio communications. "This is Unit 7 requesting immediate emergency response at the North Playground." His voice drifted down. "We have a child trapped in an underground collapse. I repeat, child trapped underground. What's your ETA on emergency services?" came the crackling reply. "Dispatch says 15 to 20 minutes for full rescue team." Helen felt her heart sink. The water was already up to Tommy's waist and rising steadily. In 20 minutes, this space could be completely flooded. "Helen," Tommy's voice rose in panic as he noticed the same thing. "The water's getting higher." "I know, sweetheart. That's why we're not waiting for anybody else." Helen positioned herself to get maximum leverage on the concrete chunk. "On the count of 3, I want you to pull your leg out as soon as you feel the weight lift off. Don't worry about the pain, just get free. Ready?" Tommy nodded, his small hands gripping the concrete beam behind him for support. 1, 2, 3. Helen lifted with everything she had, her back screaming in protest as she raised the chunk just enough for Tommy to slide his leg free. The boy cried out in pain, but managed to pull himself clear just as Helen's strength gave out, and the concrete crashed back down into the murky water. "Good job, honey. You did great." Helen gathered the injured boy into her arms, feeling the tremor in his small body. His leg was clearly hurt, possibly broken, but they were running out of time to worry about that. The water was now chest-high on Helen, which meant it would soon be over Tommy's head. She looked up at the opening above them, calculating the distance and the difficulty of the climb while carrying an injured child. "Tommy, I need you to listen very carefully," she said. "I'm going to lift you up, and you're going to grab onto that pipe there. See it? The one sticking out about halfway up. Can you hold your own weight for just a minute while I climb up beside you?" The boy looked terrified but nodded. "I think so. My arms aren't hurt." "That's my brave boy." Helen positioned herself beneath him. "Up you go." With a surge of adrenaline-fueled strength, Helen lifted Tommy high enough for him to grasp the exposed pipe. The 8-year-old's athletic training from years of tennis and swimming lessons served him well as he held on, his injured leg dangling uselessly below him. Helen quickly scrambled up beside him, her years of physical labor having kept her surprisingly strong despite her age. The concrete walls were rough and provided decent handholds, but the climb was treacherous with the wet conditions and the pressure of having a seriously injured child depending on her. "Okay, now I'm going to boost you up to where those people can grab you," she said, breathing heavily from the exertion. "Then I'll be right behind you." Above them, several adults had finally organized themselves into something resembling a rescue effort. Mrs. Patterson was lying flat on her stomach at the edge of the hole, her arms extended downward. "Come on, Tommy," she called. "Reach up to me." "I've got you, buddy," added a new voice, one of the groundskeepers who had arrived with rope and was preparing to lower it down. Helen managed to boost Tommy high enough for the adults above to grab him and pull him to safety. As soon as the boy was clear, she felt her own strength beginning to fail. The adrenaline was wearing off, and the cold water below seemed to be calling her back down. Helen, Helen, grab the rope. Mrs. Patterson's voice seemed to come from very far away. She reached up and grasped the thick rope that the groundskeeper had lowered. Hand over hand, with the help of 3 adults pulling from above, Helen managed to climb out of the hole and onto solid ground just as the first ambulance arrived, its sirens wailing across the normally peaceful estate. As she lay on the grass, gasping for breath and covered in mud and debris, Helen became aware of the small crowd that had gathered. Tommy was already being tended to by paramedics who had quickly stabilized his injured leg, and Sarah was hovering nearby, finally having found her courage now that the danger had passed. But it was the tall man in the expensive suit standing slightly apart from the group that caught Helen's attention. Even from her position on the ground, she could tell he radiated the kind of authority that came with serious money and power. His dark hair was perfectly styled despite what must have been a frantic rush from wherever he had been when he received the call about his son. William Blackwell III approached the paramedics working on Tommy, his face a mask of controlled emotion. "How is he?" she heard him ask in a voice that was used to getting immediate answers. "Looks like a fracture to the left tibia, Mr. Blackwell," the lead paramedic replied. "We'll need to get him to the hospital for x-rays and proper casting, but he's going to be fine. No life-threatening injuries." Helen watched as the man's composure cracked slightly, relief flooding his features as he knelt beside his son's stretcher. "Tommy, how are you feeling, buddy?" "Dad." Tommy's voice was weak but excited. "Helen saved me. She climbed down into that scary hole and saved me when nobody else would." William Blackwell's eyes found Helen across the small crowd, and she saw something in his gaze that she had never seen from any of the wealthy residents in her decade of working at Maple Grove. Genuine, overwhelming gratitude mixed with something that might have been shame. As the paramedics loaded Tommy into the ambulance, his father walked over to where Helen was now sitting up, having declined her own medical attention despite the protests of the emergency workers. "Ma'am," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I don't even know your name, but you saved my son's life when everyone else—" He trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. "Helen Martinez," she replied simply. "And I just did what anyone should have done." "No," William said firmly. "You did what anyone should have done, but what only you were brave enough to actually do." He paused, looking around at the other adults who were now pointedly avoiding eye contact. "I'll never forget this. Never. And I'd like to talk with you more once Tommy is settled at the hospital, if that's all right." Helen nodded, still not quite believing what had just happened. As the ambulance pulled away with Tommy and his father inside, she became aware of the whispered conversations starting up around her. The other staff members were already speculating about liability issues, about how this would affect the estate's insurance rates, about whether there would be investigations. But Helen wasn't thinking about any of that. She was thinking about a frightened little boy who had needed help, and about the moment when she had to choose between staying safe and doing what was right. She had made that choice without hesitation, and now, somehow, everything was about to change. The morning sun was still shining on Maple Grove Estate, but the perfectly manicured world would never look quite the same again. The emergency room at Greenwich Hospital buzzed with its usual controlled chaos, but William Blackwell's arrival, with his injured son, commanded immediate attention. Helen sat quietly in the corner of the family waiting area, still wearing her mud-stained uniform, feeling completely out of place among the sterile white walls and expensive medical equipment. She had insisted she was fine when the paramedics offered to check her over, but William had personally asked her to come to the hospital, a request that felt more like a gentle command. "Mr. Blackwell?" A doctor in scrubs approached, clipboard in hand. Dr. Sarah Chun looked to be in her early 40s, her black hair pulled back in a practical ponytail that reminded Helen of her own work style. "I'm Dr. Chun, the orthopedic surgeon on call. Tommy's x-rays show a clean break in his left tibia, what we call a simple fracture. With proper casting and care, he should heal completely in 6 to 8 weeks. William's shoulders sagged with relief. "Can I see him?" "Of course. He's asking for someone named Helen, though. Says she's his hero." Dr. Chin's eyes scanned the waiting area until they landed on Helen. "I assume that's you?" Helen nodded, feeling self-conscious about her appearance among all these polished professionals. Is he okay? Really okay? He's going to be fine, thanks to you, Dr. Chun said with a warm smile. That was incredibly brave, what you did. The paramedics told me about the rising water situation. A few more minutes, and she didn't need to finish the sentence. As they walked toward Tommy's room, William cleared his throat. Mrs. Martinez. Just Helen is fine, Mr. Blackwell. Helen, then. And please, call me William. He paused outside Tommy's door. I need you to know that what happened today, it's going to haunt me. My son could have died while a dozen adults stood around doing nothing. Nothing. And the only person with the courage to act was. He struggled with the words. Was the janitor? Helen supplied, not unkindly. William winced. I was going to say the only person with real character, but you're right. Everyone else was worried about liability, about protocol, about their jobs. You were worried about my son. They entered the room to find Tommy propped up in bed, his left leg encased in bright blue fiberglass. His face lit up when he saw Helen. Helen, look, they let me pick the color. He pointed proudly at his cast. I picked blue because that's your favorite color, right? Like your uniform? Helen felt her throat tighten with emotion. In all her years of working at Maple Grove, none of the children had ever noticed something as simple as the color of her uniform. That's perfect, Tommy. How are you feeling? Pretty good. The doctor gave me some medicine that makes everything feel fuzzy. Dad, did you know Helen has a grandson my age? His name is Miguel, and he plays soccer. William looked surprised. You have a grandson, Helen? 2 grandsons and a granddaughter, Helen replied. Miguel is 8, like Tommy. Carlos is 6, and little Sophia just turned 4. Do they live nearby? William asked, and Helen could hear genuine interest in his voice, not the polite small talk she was used to from wealthy employers. In Bridgeport, about 20 minutes from the estate. Helen hesitated, then decided to be honest. I take the bus to work every day. My car broke down last month, and I haven't been able to afford the repairs yet. William's expression shifted, and Helen recognized the look. It was the same mixture of guilt and discomfort that crossed wealthy people's faces when confronted with financial realities they preferred not to think about. But instead of changing the subject, as most did, he leaned forward. Tell me about them. Your grandchildren. For the next hour, as Tommy dozed on and off from his pain medication, Helen found herself in the strangest conversation of her life. She told William about Miguel's dreams of playing professional soccer, about Carlos's obsession with dinosaurs, about little Sophia's habit of reading books to her stuffed animals. She talked about her daughter Maria's struggles as a single mother working 2 jobs, about her son Roberto who was studying to become an electrician at the local community college. William listened with an intensity that surprised her. This wasn't the distracted attention she was used to receiving from the estate's residents. This was someone genuinely trying to understand a world completely different from his own. You raised your children while working full-time? He asked. While working multiple jobs, Helen corrected. Cleaning offices at night, houses during the day, whatever I could find. Their father left when Roberto was 3 and Maria was 5. It wasn't easy, but we managed. And now you're helping raise your grandchildren too? Helen nodded. Maria works at a diner and cleans offices in the evenings. I watch the kids when I'm not at Maple Grove. It's a good life. Not easy, but good. William was quiet for a long moment, staring out the hospital window at the parking lot filled with luxury cars. Tommy's mother died when he was 2, he said finally. Cancer. Since then, it's been just us, except I'm never there. I tell myself I'm working so hard to provide for him, to build something lasting, but the truth is I don't know how to be alone with him. I don't know how to be the father he needs. The vulnerability in his voice caught Helen off guard. She had expected gratitude, perhaps even a reward, but not this raw honesty. He's a good boy, she said gently. Lonely, but good. He helps me sometimes when I'm working around the playground. Holds my trash bags, tells me about his day. He talks about you a lot, you know. He's proud of you. He shouldn't be. I missed his last 3 soccer games because of work. I've never been to a parent-teacher conference. I don't even know what grade he's really in versus what grade he should be in. William's voice cracked slightly. I almost lost him today, and I wouldn't have been there to save him. A woman I didn't even know had to risk her life because I've been too caught up in building my empire to build a relationship with my son. Helen studied this man who commanded billion-dollar deals, but couldn't figure out how to connect with an 8-year-old boy. "It's not too late," she said simply. "Kids forgive easy if you're trying for real. I don't even know where to start." "Start with today? He's going to be home for weeks with that cast. Maybe work from home some? Play some games. Ask him about his friends, his dreams, what scares him at night." William looked at her with something approaching awe. "You make it sound so simple." "Love is simple, Mr. Blackwell. It's everything else that's complicated." Tommy stirred in his bed, blinking sleepily at them. "Are you guys talking about boring grown-up stuff?" "We're talking about you, actually," William said, moving closer to his son's bedside. "About how I'm going to be around a lot more while you're healing." Tommy's eyes widened. "Really? You're not going to work all the time?" "Not all the time, no. I'm going to work from home as much as possible. Maybe we can watch some movies together? Play some games. Can Helen come visit us sometimes?" Tommy asked hopefully. She could meet Miguel. I bet they'd be friends. William looked at Helen, and she saw him struggling with something. Finally, he spoke. "Helen, I know this might sound strange, but would you consider having dinner with us sometime this week? I'd love to meet your family, and I think Tommy would too, if you're comfortable with that." Helen felt the walls she had built over years of keeping professional distance from her employers beginning to crack. This man wasn't asking her to dinner because he felt obligated to reward her heroism. He was asking because something genuine had sparked between them in this sterile hospital room, some recognition of shared humanity that transcended their vastly different circumstances. I think I'd like that," she said carefully. "But Mr. Blackwell, William, I need you to understand something. I've worked for wealthy people for a long time. I've seen how they can be generous in the moment, when emotions are running high, and then forget all about it once life goes back to normal. I can't afford to get my hopes up, or my family's hopes up, only to be disappointed." William met her gaze directly. "I understand why you'd feel that way, Helen. I really do. All I can tell you is that I'm not the same man I was this morning. Watching my son nearly die while I was in a boardroom discussing quarterly projections. Something broke in me today. Or maybe something finally got fixed. I can't promise I won't make mistakes, but I can promise I won't forget." As if to underscore his point, he pulled out his phone and, right there in front of her, deleted 3 different work-related messages without reading them fully. "Dad," Tommy said sleepily, "will you stay here tonight? The nurses said you could sleep in that chair if you wanted to." Without hesitation, William nodded. "Of course, buddy. I'm not going anywhere." As Helen prepared to leave, William had insisted on calling a car service to drive her home rather than letting her take the bus. She reflected on the strange turns her day had taken. This morning, she had been Invisible Helen, the cleaning lady who moved through wealthy people's lives without making a ripple. Tonight, she was going home to tell her family about the day she had saved a little boy's life and somehow, in the process, saved something in his father as well. But as the black sedan pulled through the streets toward Bridgeport, Helen couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. She had lived long enough to know that when you throw a stone into still water, the ripples spread far beyond where you can see them. The question was, what other stones were waiting to be thrown? 3 days after the accident, Helen returned to work at Maple Grove Estate with a strange mixture of anticipation and dread. The playground remained cordoned off with yellow caution tape, and she could see workers from the county's engineering department examining the site where Tommy had fallen. The hole had been temporarily covered with plywood, but the bright orange cones surrounding it served as a stark reminder of how quickly perfection could crumble. "Helen, thank God you're back." Margaret Foster, the estate's head of housekeeping, approached with obvious relief. Margaret was a thin woman in her late 50s who had worked at Maple Grove for nearly as long as Helen, but her position gave her slightly more status and significantly more stress. "The residents have been asking about you nonstop. Mrs. Thornfield wants to speak with you personally, and the Crenshaw family sent flowers to your home address." "How did they even get your home address?" Helen shifted uncomfortably. "I have no idea. I didn't give it to anyone." "Well, anyway, there's something else." Margaret lowered her voice and glanced around nervously. "Mr. Hartley wants to see you in his office before you start your regular duties." Richard Hartley was the estate manager, a man Helen had interacted with exactly 3 times in her decade of employment, twice during her annual performance reviews, and once when she had witnessed a fender bender in the parking lot. He was the kind of person who managed wealth without possessing it himself, which made him particularly sensitive to maintaining the delicate social hierarchies that kept places like Maple Grove running smoothly. The management office was located in the estate's clubhouse, a colonial-style building that housed the concierge services, mail room, and administrative offices. Helen had cleaned these spaces countless times, but she had never been summoned to actually sit down and have a conversation in them. Mr. Hartley's office reeked of expensive cologne and nervous ambition. He was a man in his early 40s who dressed better than he could afford and spoke with the practiced authority of someone constantly worried about his own job security. When Helen knocked on his open door, he looked up from his computer with an expression that was difficult to read. "Helen, please, come in and sit down." He gestured to the chair across from his desk, and Helen noticed that he seemed more uncomfortable than she was. "First, let me say that what you did the other day was remarkable. Truly remarkable. The board is very grateful for your quick thinking and bravery." "Thank you, sir. However," and there was the word Helen had been waiting for, "I need to discuss some concerns that have been raised about the incident and its aftermath." Helen felt her stomach tighten. "What kind of concerns?" Mr. Hartley pulled out a manila folder and opened it carefully. "Well, there are liability issues, of course. Our insurance company is conducting a full investigation into the playground collapse, and they're asking some tough questions about maintenance protocols and safety inspections." "That doesn't have anything to do with me." No, of course not. You're not being blamed for anything, Helen. If anything, you're being praised. Perhaps too much." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "The issue is that your heroic actions have drawn some unwanted attention to certain operational aspects of the estate that we prefer to keep private." Helen stared at him. "I'm not sure I understand. Let me be direct. Yesterday, a reporter from the Greenwich Time called asking about the incident. Today, someone from the Hartford Courant wants to do a human interest story about the janitor who saved the millionaire's son. The board is concerned that this kind of media attention could lead to increased scrutiny of our operations here." The pieces were starting to fall into place, and Helen felt a familiar anger building in her chest. "You're worried that if people start paying attention to what happened, they might ask uncomfortable questions about why the playground collapsed in the first place." Mr. Hartley's smile was thin and entirely without warmth. "Helen, you've been an excellent employee for many years. Reliable, discreet, professional. The board would like to keep it that way. We're prepared to offer you a very generous bonus. Let's say $5,000, in recognition of your heroism, with the understanding that you'll decline any media interviews and keep the details of the incident private." Helen felt the blood rushing to her face. "Are you trying to buy my silence?" "I'm trying to protect everyone involved, including you. Do you really want reporters digging into your personal life? Your family's business? The media can be quite intrusive, Helen. And frankly, there are some residents here who are uncomfortable with the level of attention you've been receiving since the incident." "What kind of attention?" Mr. Hartley consulted his folder again. "Well, Mr. Blackwell has been asking the front desk for your personal information. Mrs. Thornfield has been telling people you should receive some kind of formal recognition. The Crenshaw family, as your supervisor mentioned, somehow obtained your home address to send flowers. This kind of boundary crossing between staff and residents is unprecedented, and frankly, it makes people nervous." Helen stood up slowly, her cleaning cart suddenly feeling like an anchor weighing her down. "Mr. Hartley, let me ask you something. If your child had fallen into that hole, would you want someone to save them?" "Of course, and if someone did save them, would you think it was inappropriate to want to thank that person properly?" "Helen, please understand." "No, you understand something." Helen's voice was steady but steel hard. "I've worked here for 10 years. I've cleaned up after these people's parties, their arguments, their messes. I've been invisible when they needed me to be invisible, and helpful when they needed me to be helpful. But when a child's life was in danger, I didn't stop to think about boundaries or protocols or what might make people nervous. I thought about saving a little boy." Mr. Hartley's face was flushing red. "No one is questioning your motives, Helen, but we have to think about the bigger picture here. Maple Grove operates on a certain understanding between residents and staff. Professional distance is maintained for everyone's comfort and safety." "Whose comfort? And whose safety?" Helen moved toward the door. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like the only people who need to feel safe are the ones who've been cutting corners on maintenance and hoping nobody would notice." "Helen, I strongly advise you to think carefully about what you're implying, and about whether you want to accept the bonus we're offering or not." Generous settlements like this don't come around often for people in your position. Helen paused at the door and turned back to face him. Mr. Hartley, I've been in my position long enough to know the difference between generosity and hush money. You can keep your $5,000. And you can tell the board that Helen Martinez doesn't scare easy. As she walked out of the office, Helen's hands were shaking, not with fear, but with adrenaline. She had just burned a bridge that she couldn't afford to burn, challenged people who could make her life very difficult, and probably guaranteed that her days at Maple Grove Estate were numbered. But as she pushed her cleaning cart back toward the cordoned-off playground, she thought about Tommy's bright blue cast and his father's promise to be present in his son's life. She thought about her own grandchildren and the kind of world she wanted them to grow up in, one where doing the right thing mattered more than maintaining comfortable lives. Her phone buzzed with a text message. It was from a number she didn't recognize. Helen, this is William Blackwell. Tommy is asking when you're coming to dinner. Are you free Saturday evening? I can send a car to pick you up. We're thinking 6 p.m. if that works for you. William. Helen looked at the message for a long moment, then at the playground where she had risked everything to save a child, then back at the clubhouse where powerful people were trying to manage the narrative of her heroism. She typed back, Saturday at 6 works fine, but I'll take the bus, thank you. See you then. As she hit send, Helen realized that she had just crossed another line. The one between Helen, the invisible cleaning lady, and Helen, the woman who was no longer willing to be invisible. The question now was whether she was brave enough to live on this side of the line, where nothing was certain except that hiding the truth was no longer an option. The playground might be cordoned off, but Helen Martinez was just getting started. Saturday evening found Helen standing in front of her bedroom mirror, holding up 2 blouses and feeling utterly ridiculous. At 52, she owned exactly 3 outfits that weren't work uniforms. The black dress she wore to church and funerals, a blue sweater set her daughter had given her for Christmas 2 years ago, and a simple white blouse she saved for special occasions. None of them felt appropriate for dinner at a billionaire's house. Abuela, you look pretty in the blue one, said 8-year-old Miguel from her doorway. He was spending the weekend with her while his mother Maria worked a double shift at the diner. It matches your eyes. Helen smiled at her grandson, who was wearing his favorite soccer jersey and had chocolate on his chin from the cookies they'd baked earlier. You think so? I'm nervous, Mijo. I've never had dinner at someone's house like this before. Is it really as big as a castle? Carlos, her 6-year-old grandson, peeked around his brother. Tommy said it has 15 bedrooms. I don't know about 15, but it's very big, yes. Helen pulled on the blue sweater and checked herself one more time. She looked like exactly what she was, a working-class grandmother trying her best to dress up for circumstances she'd never imagined being in. The doorbell rang, and Helen's heart skipped. Despite her text message about taking the bus, a black sedan was waiting outside her modest duplex in Bridgeport. The driver, a professional-looking man in his 30s, stepped out and approached with a warm smile. Mrs. Martinez? I'm James. Mr. Blackwell insisted on sending me to pick you up. He said something about not wanting you to worry about anything except enjoying the evening. Helen felt torn between gratitude and irritation. She had specifically said she would take the bus because she didn't want to feel indebted or out of place, but she also recognized that William was probably just trying to be considerate. Boys, be good for Mrs. Rodriguez next door, she called to her grandsons. I'll tell you all about it tomorrow. The ride to Maple Grove took only 15 minutes, but it felt like traveling to another planet. Helen had cleaned these houses for years, but she had never approached them as a guest. The evening light made the estate look even more imposing than usual, with its perfectly manicured lawns and strategically placed spotlights illuminating the colonial architecture. William's house sat on 3 acres at the eastern edge of the estate. Helen had cleaned it dozens of times, but always through the service entrance, focusing on her tasks and trying to remain invisible. Now, as James pulled up to the front entrance, she saw it from a completely different perspective. The sweeping circular driveway, the columns that reached toward the second-story balcony, the windows that glowed warmly from within. William answered the door himself, which surprised her. He was dressed casually in khakis and a navy sweater, and he looked almost as nervous as she felt. Helen, thank you for coming. You look lovely. He gestured her inside. Tommy's been talking about this all week. He's convinced you're going to solve every problem in his life and teach him how to be a hero. The interior of the house was exactly as Helen remembered it. Soaring ceilings, expensive artwork, furniture that cost more than most people's cars. But seeing it as a guest rather than a cleaning lady gave her a completely different perspective. It was beautiful, but it felt oddly empty despite its grandeur. Helen. Tommy came sliding around the corner in his sock feet, his bright blue cast making a soft thudding sound as he moved. "You're here?" "Dad, she's here." "I can see that, buddy." William's smile was genuine as he watched his son's excitement. "How are you getting around so well on that thing?" "Dr. Chen said I'm a natural. Look what I can do." Tommy demonstrated his ability to hop on one foot with impressive agility. "Very impressive," Helen agreed. "But be careful. You don't want to hurt yourself more." "Dad's been home every day since the accident," Tommy announced proudly. "We played Monopoly yesterday, and he taught me how to make pancakes this morning. Real ones, not the frozen kind Sarah usually makes." Helen noticed William's slight wince at the mention of his previous absence, but also saw the genuine pride in his face as he looked at his son. "Speaking of Sarah," William said, "she wanted me to thank you again for what you did. She feels terrible about freezing up during the emergency." "Anyone can freeze in a crisis," Helen replied diplomatically. "What matters is that Tommy's okay." They moved into the dining room, where Helen was surprised to find the table set for just the three of them rather than the formal place settings she was used to seeing when she cleaned after the Blackwells' dinner parties. The atmosphere felt intimate, almost family-like. Over dinner, a simple but delicious meal of roasted chicken, vegetables, and mashed potatoes that William had clearly prepared himself. The conversation flowed more naturally than Helen had expected. Tommy regaled them with stories about his classmates' reactions to his cast, and William asked thoughtful questions about Helen's grandchildren. "Miguel plays soccer too?" William asked when Helen mentioned her grandson's athletic interests. "Every chance he gets. There's a youth league in Bridgeport, but..." Helen hesitated, then decided to be honest. "The fees and equipment costs are hard for Maria to manage sometimes. She works so much just to keep up with rent and groceries." "What position does he play?" "Forward, usually. He's fast and has good instincts about where the ball's going to be." Helen's face lit up as she talked about Miguel. "His coach says he has real potential, but the better leagues, the ones that could help him get noticed for high school scholarships someday, they're expensive. And they play all over the state, which means travel costs too." William nodded thoughtfully, and Helen caught him exchanging a look with Tommy that suggested some kind of silent communication between father and son. After dinner, Tommy insisted on showing Helen his room and his collection of soccer trophies from the private league that Maple Grove's children played in. As they climbed the stairs, Helen noticed family photos lining the hallway. Pictures of William and a beautiful woman with Tommy as a baby. Then toddler photos with just William and Tommy, marking the clear divide of before and after his mother's death. "That's Mom," Tommy said, following her gaze to a large portrait of the three of them. "Dad says I have her smile." "You do," Helen agreed softly. "She was very beautiful." "I don't remember her very much," Tommy admitted. "Sometimes I think I do, but Dad says it might just be from looking at pictures." "Do you think that's sad?" Helen knelt down to Tommy's level, her heart aching for this little boy who had grown up with every material advantage but had lost something irreplaceable. "I think your mom would want you to be happy and feel loved, whether you remember her clearly or not. And I think she'd be very proud of how brave you were the other day." When they returned downstairs, William was waiting with coffee for Helen and hot chocolate for Tommy. As Tommy settled in to watch a movie, William gestured for Helen to join him on the back deck, where they could talk privately while still keeping an eye on his son through the glass doors. "Helen, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be completely honest with me." William's tone was serious. "Has anyone at the estate been giving you trouble since the accident? Any pressure about what you should or shouldn't say about what happened?" Helen studied his face in the dim light from the outdoor fixtures. "Why do you ask?" "Because I've been doing some digging into the playground collapse, and I don't like what I'm finding. That equipment was installed 2 years ago by a company that the previous estate manager recommended. The same company that's been doing all the maintenance since then. But when I looked into their background, they don't have the proper licensing for the kind of underground work that was involved." Helen felt her pulse quicken. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that what happened to Tommy might not have been a freak accident. It might have been negligence. Criminal negligence." William's voice was tight with controlled anger. "And if that's true, Then there are people who have a lot to lose if the real story comes out. Helen was quiet for a moment, remembering her conversation with Mr. Hartley and his offered bonus for her silence. Someone did suggest that it might be better for everyone if I kept quiet about the details. For my own good, they said. William's jaw clenched. What kind of suggestion? The kind that came with a $5,000 bonus for my discretion. Son of a... William caught himself and glanced toward Tommy, who was absorbed in his movie. Helen, I need you to know that I'm going to get to the bottom of this, regardless of who it embarrasses or what it costs. My son could have died because someone cut corners to save money or curry favor. That's unacceptable. Mr. Blackwell, William, you need to understand something. I can't afford to lose my job. I have a family depending on me, grandchildren who need me. If I make waves and end up blacklisted from working at places like Maple Grove, then you'll work for me, William said without hesitation. Helen, what you did for Tommy, what you're doing right now by telling me the truth even though it might cost you. That's the kind of character I want around my son. Around me. If they fire you for doing the right thing, then they'll have to deal with me. Helen looked at this man who commanded billion-dollar investments but was sitting on his back deck worrying about a playground collapse and the janitor who had saved his son. You don't understand what you're up against. These people, they have systems in place to protect themselves. They're very good at making problems disappear. Maybe they are, William agreed. But they've never had to make me disappear. And Helen? I don't disappear easy. As if summoned by their conversation, Helen's phone buzzed with a text message. It was from an unknown number. Ms. Martinez, this is Investigator Patricia Williams with the Connecticut State Police. I'd like to speak with you about the incident at Maple Grove Estate. Can you call me at your earliest convenience? Helen showed the message to William, whose expression darkened. It's starting, he said quietly. The question is, are you ready for what comes next? Helen looked through the glass doors at Tommy, contentedly watching his movie with his cast propped up on pillows, safe and loved, and completely unaware that his rescue had set forces in motion that would soon test everyone involved. I guess we're about to find out, she said. Monday morning arrived gray and drizzling, matching Helen's mood as she sat in the sterile conference room of the Connecticut State Police Barracks in Greenwich. Investigator Patricia Williams was a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s with prematurely gray hair and the kind of steady demeanor that suggested she'd seen enough human nature to rarely be surprised by it anymore. Mrs. Martinez, I want to thank you for coming in voluntarily, Investigator Williams said, settling into the chair across from Helen with a thick file folder and a digital recorder. As I mentioned on the phone, we're conducting a full investigation into the playground collapse at Maple Grove Estate. Your account of what happened is crucial to our understanding of the incident. Helen shifted uncomfortably in the hard plastic chair. I told the paramedics and the hospital staff everything I remember. Tommy fell through the ground. I went down to get him, and we both came back up. That's really all there is to it. Actually, there's quite a bit more to it than that. Williams opened her folder and pulled out several photographs. These are pictures taken by our crime scene team after the emergency response. Can you tell me what you see here? The photographs showed the collapsed playground area from multiple angles, but what caught Helen's attention were the detailed shots of the exposed underground infrastructure. She could see broken concrete, twisted metal, and what looked like corroded pipes that had clearly been deteriorating for much longer than anyone had admitted. It looks like everything down there was falling apart, Helen said honestly. Exactly. Our forensic engineers estimate that the storm drain system had been compromised for at least 6 months, possibly longer. The question is, why wasn't this caught during regular safety inspections? Williams pulled out another set of documents. These are the maintenance records provided by Maple Grove's management company. According to these reports, the playground area passed all safety inspections as recently as 3 months ago. But based on the physical evidence, that would have been impossible unless the inspections weren't real, Helen finished. Or unless the inspectors were looking the other way. Williams leaned forward. Mrs. Martinez, in your years working at the estate, did you ever observe anything that seemed unusual about the maintenance procedures? Contractors who seemed unqualified? Safety issues that were ignored? Helen thought carefully about her answer. She had indeed noticed things over the years. Work crews that seemed more interested in finishing quickly than doing things properly. Equipment that looked hastily repaired rather than properly fixed, areas of the estate that were kept off limits to residents without clear explanations. There were some things, she admitted. But I need to understand something first. Am I in any kind of trouble for going down into that hole to get Tommy? Williams's expression softened. Mrs. Martinez, you're not in trouble. If anything, you're a hero. But heroism sometimes reveals problems that powerful people would prefer to keep hidden. And that can make heroes inconvenient. What do you mean? I mean that since we opened this investigation, we've had 3 separate phone calls from high-priced lawyers representing various parties connected to Maple Grove Estate. They're all very concerned about protecting their clients from any unfounded allegations or unwarranted scrutiny. Helen felt a chill run down her spine. They're trying to stop your investigation? They're trying to limit it, contain it, make sure it doesn't spread beyond the immediate incident. Williams pulled out another document. But here's what they don't know. The playground collapse isn't the only safety issue we've found at Maple Grove. It's just the one that finally resulted in someone getting hurt. She spread out what looked like engineering reports and building inspection documents. Over the past 2 years, there have been 17 separate complaints filed with the county about various safety and building code violations at Maple Grove properties. Most of them were dismissed as unfounded or resolved through private consultation. But when you look at them together, a pattern emerges. Helen studied the documents, recognizing several of the addresses. These were houses she had cleaned, areas she had worked in. What kind of violations? Electrical work done without proper permits. Plumbing modifications that don't meet code. Foundation repairs that were never properly inspected. And in every case, the work was done by companies connected to Hartley Management Services, the firm that runs Maple Grove's day-to-day operations. The pieces were falling into place, and Helen felt sick to her stomach. They've been cutting corners everywhere, not just the playground. That's what it looks like. And if we're right, then what happened to Tommy Blackwell could have happened to any child at any time in dozens of different ways. Williams's voice hardened. Mrs. Martinez, we believe that there's been a systematic pattern of corruption involving Maple Grove's management, the contractors they hire, and possibly some of the local officials who are supposed to oversee building safety. Helen thought about Mr. Hartley's nervous demeanor during their meeting, his eagerness to offer her money to stay quiet, his concern about unwanted attention to the estate's operations. What do you need from me? She asked. We need you to tell us everything you've observed over the years. Every corner that was cut, every repair that seemed shoddy, every time you were told not to clean certain areas or ask questions about work being done. Williams paused. And we need you to understand that coming forward with this information might make your life complicated. How complicated? Well, for starters, you might lose your job. People involved in corruption conspiracies don't like whistleblowers, and they have ways of making them uncomfortable. You might face legal pressure, attempts to discredit your character, or professional retaliation. Helen was quiet for a long moment, thinking about her grandchildren, her daughter's struggles, the paycheck she couldn't afford to lose. But she was also thinking about Tommy's terrified voice calling up from that dark hole, and about all the other children who played on equipment that might be just as dangerous. Investigator Williams, can I ask you something? Of course. If I don't help you, and something like this happens again, if another child gets hurt because I was too scared to speak up, how am I supposed to live with that? Williams smiled for the first time since the interview began. Mrs. Martinez, that's exactly the kind of character that makes someone a real hero. Not just the person who acts in a crisis, but the person who keeps acting even when the crisis is over. Over the next 2 hours, Helen told Williams everything. She described the contractors who showed up at odd hours and worked without proper safety equipment. She talked about the time she had been told to stay away from the pool area for a week while routine maintenance was being done, only to later notice that the safety barriers looked different, cheaper, than they had before. She mentioned the repeated problems with the estate's electrical systems, and how the same company kept getting called back to fix issues that should have been resolved the first time. Williams took detailed notes and recorded everything, occasionally asking follow-up questions that revealed just how much she already knew about the situation. Mrs. Martinez, there's one more thing I need to tell you, Williams said as they wrapped up. Mr. William Blackwell contacted our office yesterday. He's hired his own private investigators to look into this matter, and he specifically requested that we coordinate our efforts to ensure nothing falls through the cracks. Is that unusual? It's unusual for someone with Mr. Blackwell's wealth and influence to actively assist a police investigation rather than trying to limit his exposure to it. Most people in his position would be more concerned about protecting their privacy and avoiding any association with corruption scandals. Helen thought about her Saturday evening with William and Tommy, about the genuine anger in William's voice when he talked about the negligence that had nearly cost his son's life. "He's a good father," she said simply. "Maybe he wasn't always, but he's trying to be now. And good fathers protect all children, not just their own." As Helen left the police station, her phone buzzed with another text message. This one was from William. "Helen, I hope your meeting went well. Tommy wants to know if Miguel can come over this weekend to watch a soccer game with us. Would Saturday afternoon work? I can send a car for both of you if Maria is okay with it." Helen stared at the message, realizing that while she had just potentially blown up her career and possibly made some powerful enemies, she had also found something she hadn't expected: allies who were willing to stand with her regardless of the consequences. She typed back, "Saturday works fine, but we'll take the bus." As she walked to the bus stop, Helen noticed a black sedan that seemed to be following her at a discreet distance. When she stopped to look directly at it, the car turned down a side street and disappeared. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was her imagination. Or maybe Investigator Williams had been right about her life becoming complicated. Either way, Helen Martinez was committed now. The truth was out there, and she was going to see it through to the end, wherever that might lead. The following Saturday afternoon found Helen sitting in William Blackwell's living room, watching her 8-year-old grandson Miguel stare wide-eyed at the enormous flat-screen television displaying a Premier League soccer match. Tommy sat beside him on the leather couch, his blue cast propped up on an ottoman, animatedly explaining the finer points of English football strategy. "See, Miguel, that's Sulla. He's probably the fastest player in the world right now," Tommy said with the authority of someone who had access to every sports channel available. "Dad says we might go to England this summer to see Liverpool play in person. You should come with us." Miguel's eyes grew even wider. "Really? We could go to England?" William, who was bringing in sodas and popcorn from the kitchen, caught Helen's expression of gentle panic. "Well, we'd have to ask your grandmother and your mom first, of course," he said diplomatically. "But if they say yes, I'd love to have you join us." Helen appreciated his sensitivity to her family's situation, but she could see the hopeful excitement in Miguel's face and knew this conversation would be difficult to navigate later. How do you explain to an 8-year-old that some dreams are too expensive to be realistic? "Mr. William," Miguel said, using the polite form of address Helen had coached him on during the bus ride over. "Tommy says you have a soccer field in your backyard. Can we see it?" "It's more of a practice area than a full field," William replied modestly. "But sure, let's go take a look." As they made their way through the house toward the back door, Helen marveled again at the casual luxury that surrounded them. But what struck her more was how different the house felt compared to her first visit. There were signs of actual life now. Tommy's homework spread across the kitchen table, a coffee mug left on a side table, a jacket thrown over a chair. It looked like a home where people actually lived, not a museum display. The backyard was expansive, featuring not just a regulation-sized soccer practice area, but also a swimming pool, tennis court, and elaborate playground equipment that was clearly far superior to what had been installed in the communal area where Tommy's accident had occurred. Miguel was speechless as he looked at the perfectly manicured grass field, complete with professional goalposts and field markings. "This is like where the pros practice," he whispered to Helen in Spanish. "Go ahead, test it out," William encouraged. "Tommy, why don't you show Miguel some of the drills your coach taught you?" Despite his cast, Tommy managed to demonstrate some basic footwork while Miguel tentatively began dribbling a ball around the field. Helen watched her grandson's face transform with pure joy as he experienced what it felt like to play on perfect grass with professional quality equipment. "He's really good," William observed, settling beside Helen on a bench overlooking the field. Tommy wasn't exaggerating about his speed. "Soccer is his escape," Helen explained. "When he's playing, he forgets about everything else. His mom working 2 jobs, the cramped apartment, the kids at school who make fun of his second-hand cleats. For those 90 minutes, he's just a boy who loves the game." William was quiet for a moment, watching the boys play. "Helen, can I ask you something personal?" "I suppose. How do you do it?" raise a family, work full-time, help with your grandchildren, and still find the energy to risk your life for someone else's child? Helen considered the question carefully. I think about what kind of world I want my grandchildren to grow up in. One where people help each other, or one where everyone just looks out for themselves. Every choice I make is a vote for the kind of world I want to see, even when those choices might cost you everything. Especially then. Helen looked at him directly. Mr. Blackwell, William, can I ask you something? Of course. Why are you really doing this? The investigation, the lawyers, all of it. You have enough money to send Tommy to private school anywhere in the world, to live somewhere completely safe. You could just walk away from all this mess. William was quiet for so long that Helen wondered if she had overstepped. Finally, he spoke. Because walking away would teach Tommy that money can solve any problem, and that's not the lesson I want him to learn. I want him to understand that some things matter more than convenience or comfort, such as the idea that when someone saves your child's life, you don't abandon them to face the consequences alone. William's voice was firm. And the idea that when you discover corruption that could hurt other children, you don't stay quiet just because it's easier. Their conversation was interrupted by Miguel running over, breathless with excitement. Abuela, Tommy says his dad knows scouts who could watch me play. Real scouts who help kids get scholarships. Helen felt her heart sink. This was exactly what she had been afraid of. Miguel getting his hopes raised about opportunities that might not be realistic for a boy from their background. William seemed to sense her discomfort. Miguel, what your grandmother and I were talking about is how there are some very good youth leagues in this area that might be a better fit for someone with your skills. Not necessarily with scouts right away, but programs that could help you develop as a player. But those cost money, Miguel said, his excitement dimming slightly. Mom says we can't afford the good programs. Helen saw William and Tommy exchange another one of their meaningful looks. Well, William said carefully, sometimes there are scholarships available for kids who really love the game. Maybe we could look into that. Before Helen could object, her phone rang. The caller ID showed Investigator Williams's number. I need to take this, she told William, stepping away from the boys. Mrs. Martinez, I'm sorry to bother you on a weekend, but we've had some developments in the investigation that you need to know about. Helen felt her stomach drop. What kind of developments? The good news is that we've found additional evidence supporting your statements about the maintenance irregularities. We executed a search warrant on Hartley Management Services yesterday and recovered documents that show a pattern of fraudulent safety inspections going back 3 years. And the bad news? The bad news is that someone tipped them off about the search warrant. Most of the files we really wanted were missing by the time we got there. Clearly destroyed or hidden. Helen looked back toward William and the boys, who were now engaged in an animated discussion about soccer strategy. What does that mean for the case? It means someone with access to law enforcement information is working with the people we're investigating. And it means they're going to be even more motivated to discredit or silence anyone who might testify against them. Investigator Williams, are you telling me I'm in danger? I'm telling you to be very careful. Don't go anywhere alone if you can help it. Don't meet with anyone connected to Maple Grove without a witness present. And if anything unusual happens, anything at all, call me immediately. As Helen hung up the phone, she realized that William had been watching her with concern. Everything okay? He asked quietly. Helen glanced at the boys, who were now attempting trick shots on goal, completely absorbed in their game. Can we talk privately for a moment? They walked far enough from the field that the boys couldn't overhear. Helen quickly summarized her conversation with Investigator Williams. Williams' expression grew increasingly serious as she spoke. Helen, I think you and Miguel should stay here tonight. Both of you. We can't do that. Why not? We have plenty of room, and I'd feel better knowing you're safe. Helen felt the familiar tension between gratitude and independence that had been plaguing her since this whole situation began. Because I can't keep accepting your help without giving anything back. It makes me feel like charity. Helen, look at me. William's voice was gentle but firm. This isn't charity. This is what people do for each other when they care. You saved my son's life. You're helping expose corruption that could have hurt dozens of other children. You're risking your job and your safety to do the right thing. If accepting help makes this easier for you, then letting me help is actually a gift you're giving me. Before Helen could respond, Miguel came running over. Abuela, Tommy says they have a movie theater in their basement, with real movie theater seats. Can we watch a movie? Helen looked at her grandson's excited face, then at Tommy hopping over on his cast with equal enthusiasm, then at William's sincere expression of concern for their safety. Just for tonight, she said finally. But I'm cooking dinner. I don't care how fancy your kitchen is. If we're staying, we're eating real food, not takeout. William's smile was radiant. Deal. But I'm helping. As they walked back toward the house, Helen couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. She glanced around the property's perimeter, but saw nothing unusual. Still, Investigator Williams's warning echoed in her mind. The truth was coming out, but the people who had been hiding it weren't going to give up without a fight. And Helen was beginning to understand that sometimes, the most dangerous part of being a hero isn't the moment when you risk your life. It's everything that comes after. Monday morning brought an unwelcome surprise. Helen arrived at Maple Grove Estate to find her access card deactivated and a security guard waiting by the employee entrance with an envelope bearing her name. Inside was a formal termination letter, effective immediately, citing restructuring of custodial services and budget considerations. The letter was signed by Richard Hartley and included a severance check for 2 weeks' pay, exactly the minimum required by Connecticut law. I'm sorry, Mrs. Martinez, said the security guard, a young man named David who had always been polite during her years at the estate. Mr. Hartley asked me to escort you to collect any personal items from your locker. Helen felt a mixture of anger and resignation as she cleaned out the small metal locker that had held her spare uniform, a photograph of her grandchildren, and a rosary her mother had given her decades ago. She had expected this, but that didn't make it any less devastating. At 52, with no college degree and a gap in employment history that would be difficult to explain without referencing the very incident that had cost her this job, finding comparable work would be a challenge. David, she said as they walked back toward the exit, how long have you worked here? 3 years, ma'am. In those 3 years, have you ever seen them fire someone for budget reasons during the busy spring season when they usually hire additional staff? David's uncomfortable expression told her everything she needed to know. Ma'am, I'm not supposed to discuss personnel decisions. As Helen waited for the bus at the estate's main gate, her phone rang. It was Maria, her daughter, calling from the diner where she worked the morning shift. Mommy, Miguel told me about his play date with the rich boy. Are you sure this is a good idea? Getting involved with these people? It's complicated, Mija. No, it's not complicated. These people live in a different world. They have different rules. And when they're done playing with us, they throw us away. Maria's voice carried the bitter wisdom of someone who had learned not to trust easy solutions. Miguel came home talking about England and soccer scholarships. Do you know how hard it's going to be when he realizes none of that is real? Helen felt the weight of her daughter's words, especially knowing that she had just lost the job that provided their family's most stable income. Maria, I know you're worried. I'm not worried. I'm terrified. Miguel's already asking why we can't have a big house like Tommy's, why we have to take the bus everywhere, why his cleats don't look like the ones in the stores. This is exactly what I was afraid would happen. Before Helen could respond, a black sedan pulled up to the bus stop. The window rolled down to reveal William Blackwell behind the wheel, looking uncharacteristically casual in jeans and a polo shirt. Helen, I heard what happened. Get in, we need to talk. Maria, I have to go? We'll finish this conversation tonight. Mommy, please be careful. For all of us. Helen hung up and approached William's car, acutely aware that accepting this ride was probably not the best way to address her daughter's concerns about their family getting too entangled with people from a different social class. How did you hear about my firing so quickly? She asked as she got into the passenger seat. I have a friend on the estate's board of directors. She called me this morning, quite upset about the decision. William's jaw was tight with anger. Apparently, Hartley pushed it through as an emergency personnel action without following the usual procedures for terminating long-term employees. It doesn't matter. They have the right to fire me for any reason or no reason at all. Actually, they don't. Not when the firing is clearly retaliation for cooperating with a criminal investigation. William turned to look at her directly. Helen, I've been on the phone with my attorneys all morning. What Hartley did is illegal, and we can prove it. Helen felt a familiar surge of frustration. William, I appreciate your concern, but I can't afford to get into a legal battle with my former employer. I need to find another job, not spend months fighting a case I might not win. What if I told you that you already have another job? What do you mean? William pulled out a manila folder from the back seat. I've been thinking about this since Saturday, actually since before your firing. Tommy needs more than a nanny. He needs someone who can teach him about character, about doing the right thing even when it's difficult. Someone who can help him understand that privilege comes with responsibility. Helen opened the folder to find a formal job offer, not for housekeeping or maintenance, but for a position titled Family Assistant and Youth Mentor. The salary was more than double what she had been earning at Maple Grove. I can't accept this, she said immediately. Why not? Because it feels like charity. Because my daughter already thinks I'm getting too involved with your world. Because, she struggled to find the right words. Because I don't want to be your family's project. William was quiet for a moment as they sat in the car outside the estate's gates. Helen, let me tell you something about my world, as you call it. It's full of people who think money can solve any problem and buy any outcome they want. It's full of people who've never had to struggle for anything and who mistake privilege for virtue. He paused, gathering his thoughts. But what happened in that playground showed me something important. When a real crisis came, all the money and education and social connections in the world didn't matter. What mattered was character. And you have something that most people in my circle have never developed, the ability to act on principle even when it costs you everything. William, I'm not offering you charity, Helen. I'm offering you a job that I genuinely need done and that you're uniquely qualified to do. Tommy needs to learn how to be a good person, not just a successful person. He needs to understand that real strength comes from helping others, not from accumulating advantages for yourself. Helen looked at the job description again. The responsibilities included tutoring assistants, character development activities, community service coordination, and family mentoring. It was unlike any position she had ever seen offered. What about my grandchildren? Maria barely makes ends meet, even with the money I was contributing from my cleaning job. The position includes family support services, Williams said, including educational assistance for family members who might benefit from additional opportunities. Helen felt tears prickling her eyes. You can't just fix everything with money. I'm not trying to fix everything. I'm trying to build something better for both our families. Tommy needs what you can teach him, and your family deserves opportunities that have been denied to them by an unfair system. Before Helen could respond, her phone buzzed with a text message. It was from an unknown number. Stop digging into things that don't concern you, or you'll regret it. This is your only warning. Helen showed the message to William, whose expression darkened considerably. That settles it, he said firmly. You're not going home alone today. In fact, you're not going anywhere alone until we figure out who sent this and what they're capable of. William, I can't hide forever, and I can't let them intimidate me into staying quiet. You're right, you can't. Which is why we're going to do something that people like Hartley and his associates never expect from people like us. What's that? We're going to fight back. But we're going to do it smart, with resources and allies and a plan that doesn't just expose the corruption, it replaces it with something better. As they drove away from Maple Grove Estate, Helen realized that her life had just taken another dramatic turn. She was no longer just the cleaning lady who had saved a boy from a collapsed playground. She was becoming something she had never imagined being. A player in a game where the stakes were much higher than she had ever realized. The question was whether she was strong enough to play that game without losing herself or her family in the process. 3 weeks later, Helen sat in the passenger seat of William's car as they pulled into the parking lot of the Connecticut Attorney General's office in Hartford. The imposing government building rose before them, its limestone facade gleaming in the late morning sun. In the back seat, a box of carefully organized documents represented months of investigation by Williams' private security team, working in coordination with Investigator Williams and her state police unit. Are you ready for this? William asked, adjusting his tie nervously. Despite his wealth and business experience, he seemed as anxious as Helen felt about the meeting ahead. I don't think anyone can be ready for something like this, Helen replied, smoothing her new navy blue dress. Part of the professional wardrobe William had insisted on providing for her new role. But we're here, so I guess we're doing it anyway. The past 3 weeks had been a whirlwind of revelations and complications. Helen's new position as Tommy's mentor had given her a front-row seat to how the wealthy really lived, but more importantly, It had provided her with resources she had never imagined having access to. Williams' legal team had not only successfully challenged her wrongful termination, but had also uncovered a pattern of retaliation against other employees who had raised safety concerns over the years. The threatening text messages had continued, always from different numbers, always untraceable, but they had also grown more specific. Someone knew about Miguel's soccer schedule, about Maria's work shifts, about Helen's daily routines. The implicit message was clear: we can reach your family anytime we want. That knowledge had led to some difficult conversations with Maria, who was struggling to understand how her mother's heroic act had somehow put their entire family at risk. "Mommy, I'm scared," Maria had admitted just the night before. "Miguel keeps asking why he can't walk to school alone anymore, why Mrs. Rodriguez has to watch them whenever I'm at work. How do I explain to an 8-year-old that there are bad people who might hurt him because his grandmother did the right thing?" Helen had no good answer for that question, which was part of what had driven her to push for this meeting with the Attorney General's office. The corruption at Maple Grove wasn't just about financial fraud. It was about a system that punished people for telling the truth and protected those who prioritized profit over safety. "Mrs. Martinez?" "Mr. Blackwell." A young assistant approached them in the lobby. "Attorney General Rodriguez will see you now." Carmen Rodriguez was a formidable woman in her 50s who had built her political career on consumer protection and government accountability. Her office walls were lined with commendations from various law enforcement agencies and photographs of her with other politicians who had built their reputations on fighting corruption. "Mrs. Martinez, Mr. Blackwell, thank you for coming in," she said, gesturing for them to sit at a conference table where Investigator Williams was already waiting with several other officials Helen didn't recognize. "I've been following your case with great interest, and I have to say, what you've uncovered is both impressive and deeply disturbing." Williams opened the presentation. "In the 3 months since the playground collapse, our investigation has expanded far beyond Maple Grove Estate. We've identified a network of corrupt relationships involving property management companies, construction contractors, and local building inspectors that appears to span multiple municipalities throughout Fairfield County." She pulled out a chart showing connections between various companies and individuals. Hartley Management Services was just one node in a much larger web. They were systematically bribing inspectors to overlook safety violations, using unlicensed contractors for major infrastructure work, and then covering their tracks by intimidating or firing employees who raised concerns. Attorney General Rodriguez leaned forward. "The financial scope of this conspiracy is staggering. We're talking about millions of dollars in fraudulent contracts and hundreds of properties where residents have been unknowingly living with serious safety hazards. But here's the most troubling part," Williams continued. "When we tried to expand our investigation, we encountered resistance from some unexpected sources. Phone calls from influential attorneys, pressure from local political figures, attempts to limit our access to records and witnesses." Williams spoke up. "You're saying the corruption goes even higher than we thought. We're saying that there are people with significant political and economic power who have been benefiting from this system and who are now working very hard to shut down our investigation," Rodriguez replied. "Which is why we need people like you. People with credibility and courage, to help us bring this story to light in a way that can't be buried or discredited." Helen felt a familiar knot of anxiety in her stomach. "What exactly are you asking us to do?" "We want you to go public," Rodriguez said. "Next week, we're holding a press conference to announce the indictments of 12 individuals connected to this conspiracy, including Richard Hartley and the owners of 3 construction companies. We'd like you to be there as the whistleblower whose courage started this entire investigation." "And what happens after that?" Helen asked. "What happens to my family when everyone knows who we are?" Williams answered. "Mrs. Martinez, I'm not going to lie to you. Going public will bring attention and scrutiny that might be uncomfortable. But staying silent isn't really an option anymore either. The people who've been threatening you know that you're the key witness in this case. They're not going to leave you alone, whether you testify publicly or not. However," Rodriguez added, "there are protections we can provide. Witness security if necessary, legal assistance, job placement support. And frankly, once this story breaks, you're likely to find that you have more opportunities than you can imagine." "People admire courage, Mrs. Martinez," especially when it comes from someone who had nothing to gain and everything to lose. William reached over and squeezed Helen's hand. Whatever you decide, you won't face it alone. I've already committed to seeing this through, and my resources are at your disposal for as long as it takes. Helen thought about Tommy, who had grown so much in the past month under her mentoring. She thought about Miguel, whose eyes lit up whenever he talked about the soccer training sessions that William had arranged with a professional coach. She thought about Maria, who was finally able to work just one job thanks to the family support services that had come with Helen's new position. But most of all, she thought about the children she didn't know. Kids playing on other playgrounds, living in other properties, trusting that the adults responsible for their safety were actually doing their jobs. Attorney General Rodriguez, Helen said finally, if I do this press conference, will it really make a difference? Will it actually stop these people from hurting other children? Mrs. Martinez, I've been fighting corruption for 25 years, and I can tell you that sunlight is the best disinfectant. These conspiracies survive because they operate in darkness, because victims and witnesses are too scared or too isolated to speak up. When someone like you, someone with obvious credibility and no hidden agenda, tells their story publicly, it gives other people permission to come forward with their own experiences. Rodriguez paused. More importantly, it sends a message to other potential corrupt actors that there are real consequences for putting profits ahead of public safety. Helen looked around the table at these powerful people who were asking for her help, then thought about the modest duplex in Bridgeport where her grandchildren were probably doing homework at the kitchen table. I'll do it, she said, but I have some conditions. Name them, Rodriguez replied. First, I want protection for my family until this is completely resolved. Not just me, but my daughter and grandchildren too. Agreed. Second, I want a commitment that this investigation won't stop with these 12 indictments. If there are other people involved, other properties at risk, I want your word that you'll pursue them too. You have it. And third, Helen looked directly at William. I want to establish a fund to help other working families who find themselves in situations like mine. People who need support to come forward when they witness wrongdoing, people who get retaliated against for doing the right thing. William smiled. Helen, I'd be honored to help you set up something like that. As they left the Attorney General's office an hour later, Helen felt a strange mixture of terror and exhilaration. In 1 week, she would stand in front of television cameras and tell her story to the world. She would go from being Invisible Helen, the cleaning lady, to being a public figure in a major corruption scandal. Having second thoughts? William asked as they walked to the car. Having all the thoughts, Helen replied. But no, I'm not changing my mind. This isn't just about us anymore. As William started the car, Helen's phone buzzed with yet another threatening text. You have no idea what you're starting. Last chance to walk away. Helen showed the message to William, then typed back, I know exactly what I'm starting, and I'm not walking away. She hit send and then turned off her phone. Whatever came next, Helen Martinez was ready for it. The question was whether the world was ready for Helen Martinez. 1 year later, Helen stood on the stage of the Connecticut Community Foundation's annual awards dinner, looking out at an audience that would have seemed impossible to her just 18 months ago. The ballroom was filled with politicians, business leaders, activists, and journalists, people whose worlds she had once moved through invisibly, but who now knew her name and her story. When I crawled down into that hole to save Tommy Blackwell, Helen said into the microphone, her voice steady despite the magnitude of the moment, I wasn't thinking about becoming a whistleblower or a public figure or an advocate for working families. I was just thinking about a scared little boy who needed help. In the audience, she could see William and Tommy at their table near the front. Tommy, now 9 and fully recovered from his injury, gave her an encouraging thumbs up. Beside them sat Maria, Miguel, Carlos, and little Sophia, all dressed up for what Sophia had declared Abuela's fancy party. But what I learned over the past year is that courage isn't just about one moment of crisis. It's about what you choose to do with all the moments that come after. The corruption scandal that had started with a playground collapse had ultimately led to 43 indictments, the resignation of 2 county commissioners, and new state legislation requiring independent oversight of all public safety inspections. Richard Hartley was serving an 18-month prison sentence for fraud and conspiracy. 3 construction companies had been banned from public contracts and fined millions of dollars. More importantly, The Helen Martinez Whistleblower Protection Fund, established with a $2 million commitment from William and matching contributions from dozens of other donors, had already helped 17 other families who had faced retaliation for reporting safety violations, wage theft, and other workplace abuses. The real heroes in this story, Helen continued, are not people like me who get to stand on stages and receive awards. The real heroes are the single mothers working 2 jobs to keep their families housed and fed. The real heroes are the maintenance workers who risk their jobs to report safety violations. The real heroes are the children who adapt and persevere and find joy even when the world doesn't give them the advantages they deserve. She paused, looking directly at Miguel, who was wearing a brand new uniform from the elite soccer academy where he had earned a full scholarship, not because of William's connections, but because his talent had been recognized by scouts who now knew to look beyond the expensive suburban leagues. This year, my grandson Miguel scored the winning goal in the state championship for players under 10. But his biggest victory wasn't on the soccer field. It was learning that he could dream big dreams and work toward them, even when those dreams seemed impossible from where he started. The applause was warm and sustained, but Helen wasn't finished. I also want to talk about someone who isn't here tonight, someone who chose to transform his life in a way that matters more than any award or recognition. Tommy Blackwell's father could have used his wealth and influence to quietly settle this matter and protect his privacy. Instead, he chose to use his privilege to amplify voices that might otherwise go unheard. William shifted uncomfortably in his seat, clearly not enjoying being the focus of attention, but Helen could see the pride in his expression. William Blackwell didn't just hire lawyers and investigators, though he did that too. He listened. He learned. He opened his home and his heart to a family very different from his own, and in doing so, he showed his son what it really means to be a man of character. The transformation in William over the past year had been remarkable to witness. He had restructured his business to include a division focused on ethical investing and worker protection. He had moved Tommy to a public school where he was learning alongside children from all economic backgrounds. Most significantly, he had begun using his wealth not as a shield to protect his family from the world's problems, but as a tool to help solve them. But the person I most want to honor tonight is my daughter Maria, who works harder than anyone should have to work, who worries more than any mother should have to worry, and who still finds ways to make sure her children know they are loved and valued every single day. Maria wiped tears from her eyes as the audience turned to acknowledge her. Over the past year, with the financial pressure reduced thanks to Helen's new position and the educational support provided through the foundation, Maria had been able to cut back to 1 job and enroll in night classes to become a certified nursing assistant, a dream she had deferred for years while focused purely on survival. The question I'm asked most often, Helen continued, is whether I would do it all again, knowing what I know now about the challenges and complications that would follow. The answer is simple. I would do it again in a heartbeat. Not because it led to recognition or opportunities for my family, but because it was the right thing to do. She looked out at the audience, seeing faces of all ages and backgrounds. Some she recognized from news coverage of the corruption trials, others who had approached her at various events to share their own stories of workplace courage or family struggle. There are playground collapses happening every day in our communities, maybe not literal ones, but situations where someone with power is cutting corners at the expense of people who can't protect themselves. There are children falling through cracks in systems that are supposed to keep them safe. And there are moments when each of us has to decide whether we're going to be the person who looks away or the person who acts. The final investigation report had revealed that the corruption conspiracy had been operating for nearly 5 years, affecting over 300 properties and potentially endangering thousands of residents. The playground where Tommy fell had been just the most visible failure of a system designed to prioritize profits over people. I want to close tonight with a story about something that happened just last month. Miguel's soccer team was playing against a team from a very wealthy district. Kids who had private coaches and custom equipment and everything money could buy. At halftime, Miguel's team was losing badly, and their coach gathered them together for a pep talk. Helen smiled as she remembered Miguel's excited retelling of this story. The coach told them, "The other team has advantages you don't have. They have things you can't afford and opportunities you haven't been given. But you have something they might not have. You know what it feels like to work for everything you get. You know how to find strength when things get difficult. You know how to support each other when the odds are against you. Those aren't disadvantages. Those are superpowers. The audience was completely silent now, hanging on every word. Miguel's team came back and won that game in overtime. But more importantly, they learned something about themselves and about what really matters when challenges come. They learned that courage and character and determination aren't for sale in any store. Helen paused, looking one more time at her family, at William and Tommy, at the faces in the audience representing so many different walks of life. 1 year ago, I was a cleaning lady who nobody noticed. Tonight, I'm standing here because I discovered that the most ordinary people can do extraordinary things when they choose to act with courage rather than fear, with generosity rather than selfishness, with hope rather than resignation. She held up the Crystal Award she had been presented earlier in the evening, the Connecticut Foundation's Hero of the Year recognition. This award doesn't belong to me alone. It belongs to every person who has ever risked something important to protect someone vulnerable. It belongs to every family that has ever struggled to make ends meet while still teaching their children about integrity and kindness. It belongs to everyone who believes that we can build a world where doing the right thing doesn't have to come at such a high cost. As the audience rose in a standing ovation, Helen felt the weight of the journey that had brought her to this moment. The scared cleaning lady who had crawled into a collapsed playground was still part of her, but she was also something new, a voice for the voiceless, an advocate for the forgotten, a bridge between worlds that had seemed impossibly far apart. The ground beneath our feet is only as strong as we choose to make it, she concluded. And when it gives way, as it sometimes will, the question isn't whether we'll fall, it's whether we'll help each other climb back up. As Helen left the stage, she was surrounded by well-wishers and supporters, but her eyes were focused on her family table, where Tommy and Miguel were engaged in animated conversation about their upcoming soccer season, where Maria was helping Sophia with the crayons and coloring book that had kept the 4-year-old occupied during the speeches, and where William was watching it all with the expression of a man who had found something he hadn't even known he was looking for. The playground at Maple Grove Estate had been rebuilt with new equipment, new safety protocols, and new oversight procedures. But the real reconstruction had happened in the lives of the people who had chosen to care more about each other than about protecting themselves. And that, Helen knew, was a foundation that would never collapse. Hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and if you watched all the way to the end, comment, "I watched till the end," and share your thoughts about this story. Oh, and don't forget to watch the next video that appears on the end screen. It's going to be very exciting for you.